Oh, how things change. Hey, Danny, I don't think you would have said that about 6 years ago. Oh, nice to see all of you. It's funny because I don't go to very many events. In fact, I thought Danny was going to call me out earlier when he was talking about all the people he's invited to be at previous events who said no. But my strategy was that I would always interview 5 or 10 of the people he was going to have as speakers on my radio show. So I kind of got a preview of everything. And then why did I have to come? Because I already knew what was going to be discussed. But I was glad that he invited me because healthcare reform is one of the issues that I feel so passionately about. And I'm glad to be able to talk a little bit about it. Let me just give a shout out to my dear friend, Paul Hinman, who he wears his heart on his sleeve. And I think one of the first times I met with him, he told a story about George Washington and he got all teary-eyed as well. I'll let him tell that story. But he introduced me to the Alexander Tytler. And I want to just mention this to you because I feel like everything old is new again, because when I was lobbying Paul, when he first introduced me to this to me, back when I was with the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, small business advocate, he was the leader of an opposition party in the legislature. And he was talking about the cycle that we go through historically. And we had just come through a period of abundance. And he was telling me that we were on the cycle, and clear as day, this is the place that we were going. So that if you look it up, if you want to look on your phone, it goes in a bit of a circle. So abundance is kind of around here at the bottom of the circle. And then the next one is selfishness. Remember the fair share debate that happened pretty shortly after that? And then the complacency. Do you remember how difficult it was to, at complacency and apathy, actually, how difficult it's been to get even conservatives to come out and work on political election campaigns, especially, say, in municipal office? Maybe we're well past complacency and apathy because look at this latest turn that we went to. Dependence. How many of us know people who decided to go on the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit rather than work? And I'm in the restaurant business, and I can tell you that it was pretty difficult to get part-time waitresses to come back to work last summer when we were competing with $2,000. I can tell you now that I'm in business advocacy again, how there's shortage of qualified labor in construction sites all over the province. So we're now in that period of dependence, or have we crossed over into bondage? That's sort of where the circle ends or begins again. And I would argue to you that when you have politicians who just 6-9 months ago were saying, no way would we ever have mandatory vaccination or vaccine passports. That's conspiracy theory. And now we have legislation coming through to protect companies who decide to fire their workers so they don't have to pay them severance in this province. We've got healthcare workers that are faced with the decision, get jabbed or get lost. They actually, you probably saw this in the last 24 hours, they had to extend that another month because guess what? 25%, well, truly, if 25% of your workforce decides they're not going to show up to work when we're entering another respiratory virus season, what do you think is going to happen? So I don't know whether it's going to be that kind of reality check that is going to cause this to turn around, but I would not have thought that we would so quickly get to bondage, and I would not have thought that 75 to 80% of the public would support it. I always felt like, because I call myself a conservative libertarian. My dear friend Andrew Lawton is a libertarian conservative, and I'll talk a little bit more about what the difference between those two are. But I thought that our way of winning the kids over was that for sure they would understand how important liberty was. For sure we'd be able to convince them they should have been able to smoke pot or do what they want with their body, my choice, or be able to have free speech and say what they want and have. My stepson went to Alberta College of Art and Design, so I can tell you those kids with the artwork, they get a little bit racy. But I figured that we'd be able to get the kids on the civil liberties, and then we just had to convince them that economic liberty had the same principles. And now what do? That no one cares about civil liberties anymore. It's a real conundrum that we have. So I don't want to leave you thinking that it's all doom, because it is a circle. So after bondage, something else comes. Faith, then courage, then liberty, then abundance again. Now the question will be, if it took us 10 or 12 years to get from abundance to bondage, is it going to take another 10 or 12 years to get from bondage to liberty? I don't know the answer to that. If you look at our friends from the former Soviet Union, it took decades. And so maybe because of technology, things sped up towards bondage. Maybe because of technology, they can speed up towards liberty. I think that's an unanswered question at the moment. But let me tell you a little bit about why I say we come full circle, because here I am, a business advocate with the Alberta Enterprise Group, and here Paul is the leader of another Conservative party, but he's not in the legislature yet, although I suspect if things keep going the way they are, he will be very soon. What if I told you though, and I'm going to try out some talking points on this group, because I know it's a hard thing when we have to kind of change our messaging, and if I've got it wrong, I figure this is the group that's going to tell me I've got it wrong, because I've come to a couple of different conclusions about how we need to message on the issue of healthcare. And I'm trying to message to a centrist crowd. So please hold your booze and your apples. I see that you got some apples you can throw at me at the end, but I do want your honest feedback, because this is what I think we need to do if we're going to restore a proper and successful conservative libertarian movement, and if we're going to win government. So what if I told you that we could transform the healthcare system with 3 policy changes that could be implemented immediately, that would cost about $1.5 billion, that would create widespread public support, that would unleash innovation, and that would be completely compliant with the Canada Health Act or the Alberta Health Act, should that be the one that gets implemented after Paul's premier. Let me tell you a little bit about my concern about our movement. I think the problem that we have in our movement is that we frame things in terms of what we're against, as opposed to in terms of what we are for. And as a result, whenever we talk about social programs and social spending, it gets framed in terms of how much are we going to cut? Where are we going to cut from? How deep are the cuts going to be? And that is not an aspirational message, and it's not a winning message, because here's a home truth about Alberta. It's a little unpleasant to hear, but it is the truth. I believe that our culture was set by progressive conservative leader, Peter Lougheed. He came in an era where he had more money than he could possibly spend on the current programs. So what did he do? Like any politician does, that he expanded the amount of government programs that they spent money on. And I think what happened, because it got then reinforced after a period of austerity under Getty and Klein 1.0 and 2.0, it got reinforced under Klein 3.0. Because guess what happened? As soon as we got money again, I remember Premier Klein campaigning, having, I think, just given money to the nurses. And then he said, don't worry, teachers, you're next. Or it was the other way around. Either way, there was the promise that we could keep on spending at a rate that was greater than any other province, at the same time as not increase our taxes. And of course we were able to do it because we had resource revenues that came in. And so we really did have a classic system where I call it, it's really Saudi Arabian economics is what it is, right? Is that you don't have to pay for anything because the crown will pay for it. And you can have and here in our case, it's the very best services. And if we're going to be honest about it, we have to accept the character of Albertans the way they are. Albertans don't want their social programs cut. And even conservatives don't want their social programs cut. And I can tell you why, because when I was with Paul in the Wild Rose days, I remember when we were talking about the challenge of how to balance the budget. And our budgeting was centered around $80 a barrel oil. And that was the model. We said we can balance the budget without raising taxes and without doing cuts as long as oil was at $80 a barrel. It's still not gotten back to $80, I should remind you. And so I think that we have to be aware of just how reliant we were on our resource royalties. And sadly, we're back there again, because look what happened with this most recent budget announcement. It looks like we're going to have the second highest amount of resource royalties that we've ever had in our history, and we're still going to run a $10 billion deficit. We're overspending, a structural overspending by $12 billion. So what do you do about that? So I'm going to put it to you here that I don't think healthcare spending can be cut. And I remember talking with Wild Rose supporters back in the day, and they said, absolutely, we want you to balance the budget, but we want you to do it without cutting healthcare, education, or infrastructure. That's 90% of the budget cost. So what do you do with this problem you're facing? It's a political problem. So let me tell you what I think we can do. I would put it to you that COVID didn't break our healthcare system. COVID showed us how broken our healthcare system really is. And I think it's important for us to understand anything that I say here today about healthcare. I think the principles need to be thought through and applied to other areas of government spending. So in the issue of healthcare, though, I remember back in the 90s was when Klein was worried at the time, because healthcare was making up, I think it was 25% of budget expenditures. We are well on our way to it making up 50% of our budget expenditures, and it's going to keep on growing, and the demand is going to keep on growing. So first of all, look at the ways in which, even though we were spending close to $25 billion and almost half of everything that comes in, with $6 billion being transferred in from the federal government, incidentally, under the Canada Health Transfer, we found out that when we needed PPE, personal protective equipment, we didn't have any on hand. So we had to jump into action to order it in. When you look at testing, it took forever. And then finally, when we did approve testing, it was only 2 types of rapid tests, and it's also very expensive. There's very few choices. Long-term care, we revealed the hidden truth that the only way we make the system work is by relying on Canadian newcomers who want to work more than 40 hours a week. So we develop a system where they can be shared between multiple facilities so that they can work 60 or 70 or 80 hours a week. And as a result, in the early first phase, we found that if workers were getting infected at one long-term care facility, they were then going to other long-term care facilities. It's part of the reason why we had such a catastrophe in the first wave in our long-term care. ICU, we discovered we have no surge capacity, but worse, no ability to increase surge capacity. I remember when Premier Jason Kenney was on the podium last April 2020, and I was not happy about shutdowns, but you know what? I accepted his position that we needed to make sure that we built the capacity of the system, that we trained staff up, that we could deal with the surge. He said we were going to add an additional 1,081 ICU beds for COVID in particular. And so then when we got into the second surge, another round of lockdowns in November, I started saying, what the heck happened? We have a very few number of patients in ICU. We were supposed to have these 1,100 additional beds. I was told by somebody in government that we never had the ability to increase the capacity that much. The most we ever could have increased ICU was to 425 beds. So did that mean that the Premier didn't know that? Does that mean that his people told him one thing and that was not achievable? Or does that mean he gave an order and he was purposely defied by Alberta Health Services? Either way, it doesn't look good on anyone that we were not able to increase ICU capacity, and worse, because in this last wave, what did we discover? They've decreased ICU capacity. So we started off with 295 beds. I thought we'd gone up to 425 in last December, and now we're back down to 268. How is that even possible, given all the money, all the time, all the investment, all the direction, all the latitude that we haven't been able to increase surge capacity? Look at medical research. We've developed a system where only large pharmaceutical companies are able to do the appropriate type of research that will be validated and recognized by Health Canada and our colleges of physicians and surgeons. I make a joke sometimes that we now have mercamectin. And as you know, Merck used to make a drug called stromectil, I won't say the name of it. It begins with an I, because if you say the I word, you might end up getting deplatformed. But what is really interesting about that particular drug is that, first of all, Merck made it. Merck has given 4 billion doses around the world. They absolutely know how safe it is. The founder, the discoverer of that drug, who won a Nobel Prize for it in medicine, approached Merck with a team of researchers saying, we'd love to do a clinical trial on COVID to see if it works. And Merck declined. And now Merck has got approval, or is seeking emergency approval, for a drug that had 325 patients go through a clinical trial and is now going to cost $700 for a 5-day course of treatment. So if you don't think that there's something seriously broken with the medical research system, I think that COVID has revealed that. Then you look at treatment, and with the exception of the doctors in this room, I have found doctors to be astonishingly uncurious about what is available out there. Isn't it the truth? Astonishingly uncurious. I found a doctor prior to COVID who was my guiding light and my advisor all the way through COVID, which is probably why I'm not terrified, like so many others who have been in media and in public life, because he told me very early on about the potential for different medical treatments. And you know what? I'm not going to say the I word because it's not the only one. This is the point. You can look them up yourself. C19early.com. It lists over 1,000 medical papers with at least 20 drugs listed there that have demonstrated to reduce the likelihood of hospitalization and reduce the likelihood of death. If I can find it, why can't Dr. Dina Hinshaw? Why can't Health Minister Jason Copping? Why can't Premier Jason Kenney? This is the other part of it, is that there does seem to be, and maybe the doctors will have to explain this, that maybe doctors cram so much information in their brain in medical school they didn't feel like they had to learn anything else. Maybe they've just deferred too much to their college to tell them what's on and what's off. But the doctors that I know have researched this independently know that there are a lot of drugs that have the potential, not just the 2 that the media have freaked out about, but budesonide and fluvoxamine and colchicine. There's a whole list of them. I'm reluctant really to even talk too much about them, because that'll be the next thing that causes a furor and gets demonized as a horse pill. But that isn't proper medicine. It's not proper medical research. It's bad politics. And it's also, I think, a dereliction on the part of the media to be covering it the way they have. The colleges as well, not only are they incurious, they're full of bullies. And to me, the attitude that they have taken towards doctors, that they would rather patients have nothing for treatment than dare to have a doctor do something different than the majority is recommending, that is a clear sign. I'm totally with you. You got it. Well, it's very true. And so I'm just going to direct you to the section 5 of the Professional Code of Conduct. I don't know if I have I can find it a little bit earlier. I was showing it to Lieutenant Colonel David Redmond. It says very clearly in there that a doctor has the latitude to prescribe as long as they're not prescribing in a way that would be unethical or in a way that would be contraindicated for that particular patient, as long as it is a procedure that is no more harmful than the standard of care. Guess what the standard of care is right now? It's go home, and if your lips turn blue because you can't breathe, go to the hospital. I have to tell you, I think our doctors, given the latitude, can do better than that. And I know that there are many doctors who are trying, and the college is coming down on them like a ton of bricks. So the college is full of bullies, and it's up to the province to step in and ensure that they are enforcing the act in the way it's meant to be enforced, the same way that the Attorney General in Nebraska did. The Attorney General in Nebraska, if you haven't seen, maybe somebody's already mentioned it, did a 48-page review of all of the misinformation around this file and concluded exactly that doctors need to be given the latitude to treat their patients. Other issues that we've got, health personnel issues. We knew that we'd had this problem with nurses. I wrote about it a couple of years ago. We've created a system where nurses have an incentive to be part-time or casual, because if they're working only 2 days a week and they get called in on one of their scheduled days off, then they get to bill double time for day number 3 and day number 4 and day number 5. So who wouldn't want to work 3 days a week and get essentially full-time pay? And so now we've got a situation where we burned out all of our nurses. Nobody wants to come to work anymore. So we can't get the personnel, even though we've got the facilities. And of course, we've got the demand for patients. Somebody has already mentioned EMS and George Porter, and what a catastrophe centralization has been there. I went to one of the 4 seminars that they had. I went to the one in Airdrie. We now have a system where all of the ambulances are getting called in for calls in Calgary. And because we can't find an effective way to dispatch them and turn them around, you've got some paramedics who are spending their entire shift sitting in the emergency room waiting to offload patients at one of the hospitals. That's not a system that works, and it's demoralizing for those health professionals as well. Now we've got a backlog of surgeries that we've got to deal with, because apparently 250 patients in ICU can shut down surgeries across the entire province. And now we have mental health issues. We are social creatures. We cannot handle being apart from each other. We cannot handle the kind of isolation that has happened over the last 18 months. I've watched it because, as I mentioned, we have a restaurant. So every time we were allowed to open, we did. I've seen thousands of people over the last year and a half. Every time I could go to an event, I would. I held 5 events myself once we were allowed to. And I went to dozens of events over the summer when we were open for good. And, and I met people at the last one that I went to in Banff. I met people who had not been out of their houses in 18 months, who had not seen people in 18 months. We don't know the kind of trauma that we've done to people from not being able to see each other for 18 months. And on top of all this, we have an aging population. So if we are at this point now where we're paying 50% of everything that we earn, and we've got an aging population, we're going to have to spend more. So healthcare spending can't be cut. We don't want less of it as a population. We want more of it. We're going to need more of it based on all the things that I've just discussed, and we're going to have to spend more on it. So what is a conservative libertarian way to increase spending? I'll tell you the traditional ways we've increased spending. We've centralized. So I don't know what it is about conservatives. When we can talk about hotel chains, we seem to understand that competition is a pretty good thing, so that you can find that cute little boutique hotel down in Claresholm. But for some reason, when we're talking about government services, we think, oh, well, we have to get rid of all those layers of managers. And if we just centralize, we will have fewer managers. And so we went from having individual hospital boards to having 17 health regions. And when that didn't work and was costing money and increasing managers, well, maybe we just need to centralize more. So we went to 9 health regions. And when that didn't work, we went to a single health super board, and we've never had so many managers. It has escalated the number of managers and central planners that we have. So why did conservatives do that? Why did we think that centralizing was somehow the solution? We also have tried giving more money to AHS, that the idea was just hand them more money because it's a financing problem. If we just gave them more money, we'd get better results. I have been watching the Fraser Institute waiting your turn wait list ever since I was an intern at the Fraser Institute in 1996. And we keep getting worse and worse and worse on our waiting list, no matter how much money we give. So giving more money directly to Alberta Health Services is not the answer. And then we tried taking money from other departments because, heck, like, you can't stop the increase in growth in health spending. So let's cannibalize it away from all of the different health departments. Well, we're kind of at the end of the line there, because you can't take any more from any of those other departments either before you start eroding services there too. And so the new strategy seems to just beg for more money from Ottawa. Well, that's just embarrassing. How can we pass a referendum asking for an end to equalization? And then the solution here is, oh, we just need more money in health transfers to come to us from Ottawa. Talk about a message that goes against, I think, the autonomy that we're trying to strive for. We need obviously more of our own source revenue. So let me tell you what I think the solution is. And I'll tell you just by giving you a few examples from some of the docs that I have met in the last weeks and months. Let me tell you about Nirvana. And I'm not talking about that in sort of the esoteric sense. There is a health clinic called Nirvana that is operated by Dr. Corey Deacon. And when you walk in the door, it feels like you've walked into a spa. And you go into the back room and you can see that they've got areas for alternative types of treatments, whether it's brain scans that they do to identify issues that they might have to deal with that is reflected in a brain scan. They have a cold laser treatment that they can do to help address issues of injury that happen after cancer treatment. They have a hot laser treatment. They've got massage therapy. They do psychological assessments, but they also have a whole bank of regular doctors, including an oncologist, because they do cancer treatment there that includes immunotherapy. And they also use traditional therapy combined with alternative therapy so that if you do choose chemo, you can use a lesser dose so that you have a better recovery. They do COVID treatment, early treatment, because there's all kinds of things that you can do. They do vaccine injury treatment, because yes, there are vaccine injuries. They do long COVID treatment as well. If you have had COVID and you still have ill effects, but they are entirely a private clinic. Doesn't that tell you something? That the only way to get medical freedom and to have this combination of Western and alternative practices together is to be outside the healthcare system. Second one I'll tell you about is the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, Dr. Ira Bernstein. He is setting up a telehealth system. So you can register for $100 as a patient, and you can ask for one of these treatment protocols as well, whether it's for prophylactics, you have it on hand in the event you get diagnosed with COVID, or you get diagnosed and you want a package sent to you in the mail, you can get early treatment. Or if you have long COVID or a vaccine injury, they will also treat you as well by telehealth. Isn't that something that we have to go to a doctor in Ontario to get treatment because our doctors are punished here for trying to do the same thing? The other doctor I'll tell you about is Dr. Ron Gorshay. He is with the Charles Clark Center, which is in my hometown in High River. He built his health facility just down the street from the High River Hospital, and he built the second floor. It's a really interesting model. He's got 18 docks, and it's more like a condominium or shareholder type of model where they all buy in shares and they have a single central administrator so that they don't all have to spend the time on the administration getting their billings, but they all also have hospital admittance privileges just down the street. So they're able to do both surgeries as well as regular practice, but he built it with the second floor able to do his own surgical center on the hope that one day we'd have a government that would make it easier to do that. And what's the pathway forward for that? I don't know what the pathway forward is for any of these innovations, because here's the problem that we have. There really isn't a way with the system, the way it's structured, to promote innovation and allow for it to grow. So let me go back to how I started this. What would I tell you? Or what would you do if I told you we could transform the healthcare system by making 3 policy changes that could be implemented immediately, spend just $1.5 billion more, create widespread public support, unleash innovation, and be completely compliant with the Canada Health Act. So remember the principles of the Canada Health Act. It has to be publicly administered. So you have to have the central agency, the central health insurance system administering it, no problem. It has to be universal, meaning everybody has to be covered by it. No problem. It has to be portable so that if you go to other provinces, you would be able to use it. That's fine too. It has to be timely. I don't know if anybody is following that, but this would be timely. And it has to be comprehensive. Is our system comprehensive now? Of course it isn't. It pays for hospital services and it pays for doctor services, and pretty well everything else can be paid for under a health spending account. That is the way that we can absolutely transform the way our healthcare system works. And it would only cost $1.5 billion. So here's the plan. Just establish a health spending account with $350 for every single Albertan and tell them your employer can match it. You can match it. You can put money in tax-free. You can gift it to a friend or family member. If you don't need it, you want to set up a charity because you know that there are others who need more serious care, you can contribute it to, you can transfer it between different accounts. It would only cost $1.5 billion, and I guarantee you it would absolutely change the relationship between the doctor and the patient. It would restore that relationship and would take the college out as the intermediary, take Alberta Health Services out as the intermediary, and we would see a proliferation of the kind of clinics that I was talking about, and the kind of telehealth services and the kind of surgical services I was talking about just a minute ago. You need to give people the means to spend their own money on these types of services. Otherwise, and we've seen it, otherwise people will just sit and they'll wait and they'll hope that the government or the politicians or their doctor or someone will find a way for them to get the care that we need. We need to empower patients. We need to give them the means to do it. Second thing that we need to do is we need to split the roles of purchaser, provider, and auditor. I've interviewed Nadim Esmail so many times from the Fraser Institute, and understand this is the true nature of the problem. This is why no matter how much money we pour into the funnel at the top of Alberta Health Services, none of it is going to get down to the front line. It's because we have Alberta Health Services receives the money, and then Alberta Health Services contracts with themselves to spend the money. And then we ask Alberta Health Services to evaluate their own performance and say, how you're doing. And guess what they say? We're doing fantastic. Now think about splitting these roles. You give money to Alberta Health Insurance. It's a separate entity. It's a government entity, so it's publicly administered. They are forbidden from running any programs or any hospitals themselves. Alberta Health Services becomes the contractor. Sure, we can grandfather in their contracts for now, but then we would have the Alberta Health Quality Council do us an auditor function and tell us whether or not Alberta Health Services should continue running the Lougheed Hospital, or the Rocky View Hospital, or South Campus, or any of the 100 hospitals that they currently run in majority in the province. And if they can't meet the terms that we want them to, we can do an RFP. And then the Alberta Health Insurance can give a different contract to a different group of doctors and a different group of patients and a different entity to run all of our hospitals. That is completely compliant with the Canada Health Act. It's a structure issue. And it's a political will issue. And we've got neither of those, unfortunately, because I presented this to the health minister and they did not act on it. The third thing that we need to do is that we need to have a global budget and activity-based funding combined. Because what needs to occur is that any hospital needs to be able to contract directly so that they can get their funds directly and get outside of this structure that we have where it's sort of trickle down, whatever finally makes it to the front line, whatever decisions will finally allow you to have, will let you have. We already have a mechanism to set up private surgical centers. So imagine if High River Hospital, which does most of the hernia operations, by the way, in Southern Alberta, what if they said, you know what, we don't need to be under the umbrella of Alberta Health Services. We'd like to charter directly with Alberta Health Insurance and get our money directly. And you give a global budget to pay for what you would expect the emergency room to be on a traditional basis, but then they get paid based on activity. If they're able to do 1,000 hernias, they get paid on a per patient treatment for 1,000 hernias. If they're able to change their operations so they can do 2,000 hernia operations, then you allow the funding to follow through. None of these things would be outside the realm of what is currently possible under the Canada Health Act. I think what has happened is politicians have blamed the Canada Health Act because they're not prepared to make some of these decisions. These decisions can be made very easily, and there's probably others that would develop out of it. But this is the reason why I'm a conservative libertarian, is that I am not smarter than Dr. Ron Gorshay or Dr. Ira Bernstein or Dr. Corey Deakin. And neither are you, and neither is any politician, and neither is any central planner. This is what Hayek called the fatal conceit. And this is what we do all the time. We think, oh, well, we'll be so much better central planners than those other guys. No, no one can centrally plan a $25 billion healthcare system and get the decisions right. It requires entrepreneurs and innovators. And we have to empower entrepreneurs and innovators and patients and doctors and treat the system the way we would treat any other service that gets provided. Because if we believe in competition and choice and free enterprise and markets and pricing and supply and demand and accountability and grassroots. Why haven't we built these principles into any of the programs that we care most about? Why do we continue to do things the same way any other government does them? And now we won't get elected if we can't show people that we will take care of them and their loved ones. We will not get elected if we can't show people that we can do this better than the other guys can do it. So the other guys, we know what they will do. They'll keep the system exactly as it is. And they will just give more money to Alberta Health Services. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Because remember, I told you I was going to see if any of this was going to win over this room. How many of you want to give $1.5 billion more to Dr. Verna Yu, the head of Alberta Health Services? Okay. How many of you would like to open a health spending account and get $300 deposited into it directly so you can spend the money on yourself? I got a few. How many of you think we should campaign on cutting health spending? Still got one diehard at the back. But that's how it's perceived. That's how it is always perceived when Conservatives go into an election and we start talking about austerity and efficiency. It's perceived as we're going to cut. My view to this is that we are going to increase. We can just increase differently. We can increase better and we can spend better and we can actually create more productivity. Because I think if we create these types of changes, that we will be able to increase more slowly, but we will get massive productivity improvements and we'll be able to fix the system that way. When we talk, in my view, about healthcare, we should be talking about how much money we're going to put in the hands of patients so they can take care of themselves and their families. We should be talking about respecting choice. We should be talking about creating options for patients. We should be talking about creating more options for health workers so they aren't stuck working in the monopoly that they have right now. We should be talking about restoring the relationship between a patient and their healthcare provider. And I think people would vote for it. I know I'd vote for it. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments you have.
Thank you very much, Danielle. Well, questions? Yes. Oh, sorry. We'll take Ann first. Ladies first, Marvin. Sorry. Ann, go ahead.
In the health system that's been free enterprise since day one, maybe even before the doctors came to Alberta, and that's the pharmacists. The pharmacists in particular made $25 or did a few months ago per COVID shot, and they were charged with making sure that people gave informed consent. The drugstores, they're an independent healthcare system, right? This is the early days of private healthcare. Your community drugstore, you wander in there, have a cough, and to my mind, it seems like it's getting more and more socialized. The Alberta government said you will give COVID tests, and then they changed their mind. Then the government said you will give COVID injections. Then they picked which drugstores were allowed to give it. I mean, keep in mind, they're not buying these injections from the wholesaler. Alberta Health Services is distributing. It's $25, and then you take your staff out of that. But that not compete in that market is devastating. Yeah. To be forced in that market can be devastating. And it's the original free enterprise healthcare is becoming more socialized, not less, not more free enterprise, right? Whole aspect. We try to holding colleges to account. College of Pharmacy, by God, put that to the front of the line as well. Totally. Great question.
Will you summarize that to our people online? Will you summarize the question and then answer it?
By all means. Sure. We have a pharmacist in the audience who said that he used to be the front line of free enterprise, allowed to do a lot more services. And it seems like only certain pharmacies have been chosen for COVID tests, for injections. And the College of Pharmacy has the same problem. And they really do. I mean, in some jurisdictions, and this is, I think in Louisiana, their attorney general just wrote a letter to the pharmacist college because they were prohibiting their pharmacists from issuing
Exemption.
well, from issuing the prescriptions to doctors who wanted to also prescribe treatment. So the colleges here is also one that is, I think, acting in an authoritarian way. And I use that term, I don't like to say it, but one of my dear friends has coined the term authoritarian capitalism, is the realm that we're in right now. Is the bigger you are as a company, and it's probably the case with pharmacy, it's probably the big pharmaceutical chains. There you are, Shoppers Drug and Loblaw. So it's sort of the bigger you are as a company. And I saw this when I was at CFIB. We always, our line was always that it was big government, big labor, and big business getting together to pass regulations and laws to prevent entry to the little guy. And that is we now have institutionalized it. And I think it's a problem across the whole range. I'm a free enterprise capitalist. I am not an authoritarian capitalist, but I agree with you. It's an additional problem. So thanks for your comment.
I'll take Marvin and then Doug. Go ahead, Marvin.
Dr. Levant.
Yeah, Dr. Levant.
Very good sense. But unfortunately, I cannot do it because it does not make political sense. And I encapsulated it and sent letters to Mr. Taves,
Chandra.
basically telling them that they're politicians and not physicians. But here's a way of saving $2 billion a year without touching the doctors or nurses. The concept that is adopted in Singapore as a product of the Cato Institute, that is a tax-free savings account dedicated to health. And the China expression, you don't speak about it, but it accumulates within the account. Says either 60 or 70 years later, older age, you can have $600,000 worth, all saved up to look for caring for yourself and caring for what you pass on to your children.
Yep.
Summarize it to the people. Yeah.
So Dr. Levant has a solution. When, in fact, when I was talking about health spending accounts, it could very well morph into what he's describing with the tax-free medical savings account that exists in Singapore, where you could put money in, allow it to accumulate tax-free, and then at the end of your days, end of working days, use it for long-term care, use it for health services, use it as income support if you don't end up needing it, pass it on to your heirs if there's anything left in it when you pass on. And Dr. Levant says it could save $2 billion, but he's presented it to government before, and they say that it makes no political sense.
Exactly. Subsequent to design from practicing great knowledge as a result of control, I can't despite this rather elected by his constituents, not constituents. So I couldn't mention another big interesting practice. I have virtually had concept to take to Shamrock to
Well, Dr. Levant's had the same reception that I have had with the current government. He's gone to Health Minister Shandro, Finance Minister Taves, as well as the Premier. And I will tell you this, I mean, Paul and I will probably just sit here and kick ourselves a little bit about the policy we didn't run on in 2012 versus the one that we did. And maybe this is why it stuck with me for so long. We almost ran on health spending accounts, but we thought it would be too complicated to explain to the public. And we thought it would be perceived that we were trying to privatize the healthcare system. And we thought it would be just too hard to get past the soundbite of what you have to do in a 8-second bite for TV news. And so instead what we did is we did sort of a similar type of proposal to the Ralph Bucks, which I thought was even in the end, we got treated even worse by the media on it. And if we could have replayed that, I think we probably would have done a health spending account instead of doing a direct contribution to people. I think we have to just sort of respect where people are at. People are very nervous about healthcare, but I think if we empower them, especially now, if we empower them, give them some dollars and give them the means to save for it for themselves and for their families, I think it could be a political winner. So I agree. I mean, I was a coward back in 2012 because we didn't run on it either, but I think, you know, with the passage of time and 10 years, I think it absolutely is a political winner.
Doug?
Yeah, I just like to point out that this collusion of government and industry, this big industry, big pharma,
you know,
Summarize it so that people at home know.
it's always tricky to use the F word. Authoritarian capitalism looks an awful lot like fascism, is what our one of our audience members said. And I guess we have to be very careful about the relationship between government and big business. Crony capitalism can be devastating. It creates not only, I think, distrust in government and also in business, but it also ends up quashing competition, and it can pave the way to communism as well. Because if you throw all your eggs in one basket with a particular company, and then there's a scandal or they misspend or there's some kind of malfeasance, then it paves the way for government to say, oh, we should take that business over completely. And then you're left with communism. So I think that is the real danger of us not having enough clear dividing lines between the decision makers, who should be democratically elected, and the businesses that they're supposed to be regulating. And look, I love business. I really do. I mean, I'm in the business sector, but I don't think that people whose business model relies on them lobbying government for special treatment, special regulations. And the pharmaceutical companies are the ones that really drive me up the wall right now, because the reason we granted them monopolies called patents is because they told us, oh, we need to make sure that we can recover the cost of our R&D. Merck got money from the government for their R&D. Now they're going to be able to fast track approval for their drug. They've got the media and government colluding to make sure no other competition is out there. And they're going to charge patent prices for the next 20 years. I didn't sign up for that. That's not reasonable. So it seems to me, if government is going to be paying for the treatment, paying for the R&D, then maybe we don't need to have patent protection for some of these drugs that get developed as a result. I mean, we have to reconsider how they're using patent law to suppress good healthcare, good treatment. It's upending our entire system. And if this is the situation we find ourselves in, then we have to really do some policy changes around it, I think, because I don't think this is helping.
Danielle, did you have a question?
Dr. Nagase is clearly a revolutionary, and I'm an evolutionary. So Dr. Nagase was saying that we should just dissolve AHS immediately, return the funds to the community, and just let the community sort it out. And I guess the question is, we agree on the end result, but I have been in the realm of politics for some time now, and I have an idea of what's politically possible and what's not. And I do believe that what I've proposed here, like, literally could happen overnight. You could pass legislation that immediately separates Alberta Health Insurance from Alberta Health Services from Alberta Health Quality Council immediately. That could take place next week, and you don't have to change anything. And then the contracting process would develop over time, and the capacity, once doctors and surgical teams and hospital administrators in local communities realize, hey, we can do this. Then they'd hire a business manager, and they'd develop a proposal, and they'd bring in somebody who would advise them, and then they'd put a proposal forward. And so you would end up, the capacity is not there, in short, Doc, is that we have so infantilized the management of our individual hospitals. I don't think they could do it overnight. I think some would be able to. I think others would be in a state where they would need some time to be able to develop it. But I have absolute confidence that there'd be some early adopters, and they'd show what they could do, and they'd show the pathway, which would allow others to follow suit. Because I've just seen how entrepreneurship works, right? Is that it takes the courageous, and it takes a few leaders and a few innovators to show the pathway. And then these systems can become adopted very quickly. But I think you and I are sort of in the same mindset that ultimately we need to get back to community-based care.
Brian.
Well, just back to the pharmaceutical. We granted funding for
Ah.
For the, so if it caps result from any skin in the game, all
Completely.
from the investment side, marketing, all the way to any profitability factors.
I should have
And that's a problem in our whole system.
completely.
There is not skin in the game. There is no possibility of failure. And the possibility of failure is what makes business cheap and sharp and drives innovation.
Completely.
Possibility of failure, no possibility of failure for any of the players.
So the another important aspect that I missed in talking about the ways in which the pharmaceutical companies are a protected industry. So they are protected on the front end because we're giving them a lot of money to do their R&D and research. They're protected in the marketing because government has purchased all of the doses for all of the product that they are administering. And then they're protected on the back end on liability because they've been given blanket liability protection in the event that we, we are already seeing vaccine injury, but the companies won't be held liable for that. And the point was that failure is a key part of how free enterprise creates discipline, is that you have to have the threat of failure, of going out of business, so that others can. So first of all, it creates the discipline that you've got to create a good product that doesn't kill people or maim them. And number two, somebody who is able to create a product that doesn't kill or maim people is probably going to do better in that. Oh, and actually that's a nice other aspect, is actually having a product that works in the long term rather than wears off after a couple months.
Two more questions, then we're going to cut it off. I got Gaylord first and then you, Ian. I've got Gaylord right in front of you and then you, Ian. Good.
Thank you for taking my question. I'm going to quote a famous Canadian hero who said that the solution to ideology is reality sitting behind me.
Yes.
And what I'm trying to get, I absolutely agree with everything you said, Danielle. I agree with everything Daniel said too. What I do understand though is that when I talk to people how to learn how to die, how to be fair guy, one of the things I talk, almost everything that happens when you're about to die is very predictable. We're pretty much sure that if we take care of all the predictable things, there are very few emergencies in the care. I want to take this back to
Gaylord, we've got to, it's got to be quick.
How are we going to ensure that when we get some more power, that we counteract the ideology with education? Because the people of Alberta would go for what you say, because it's in their best interest. How are we going to show them that without looking like the ideologues we're fighting against?
Well, COVID's going to be the question was about how do we bridge ideology and reality. And I think that there's a real role for leadership here, because what I've observed, and for those who don't know my history, I've been in public policy research for 25 years. I mean, this is part of the frustration I have, is everything I'm talking about today, I was writing and talking about 25 years ago. Nothing's changed. The solutions have stayed the same, but nothing's changed. And part of what needs to happen is we need to recognize, as I'm going to be crass here, Paul's going to be mad at me, but I ran into Jim Dinning with a candidate over an election, and he said, I've got one piece of advice for you. Don't try to win every effing vote. And that's what we always try to do. We try to win every vote. We will never win the 35% of people who love Rachel Notley, will support Rachel Notley, and want Rachel Notley to be premier. We'll never win them over. So why are we trying to? We've got probably another 35% that should be with us if we were just acting in a principled way and doing what we said we were going to do, and not changing our mind and going in 180-degree different direction every time something trends on Twitter or the press gallery gets angry. And so then there's a third in the middle that can be persuaded with leadership. And I think what needs to be done, I try not to be too hard on the premier, really, but here's what I wanted him to do. When I say I was looking for a leader like Ron DeSantis, what I wanted him to do was almost what he did over the summer, where he said, we are going to have COVID with us forever, because it's a respiratory virus, and like influenza, it mutates and there's going to be variants, and we have to learn how to live with it. We know who is most impacted by this. It's those over age 70, sadly, those with pre-existing conditions. Those are the people who are most at risk. And we are going to do focused protection. We will probably have to have regular boosters for those who are in those categories, and people are still going to get sick. And when they get sick and show up in hospital, we will have monoclonal antibody treatment available for every single person who needs to be hospitalized, because that will ensure that they don't get worse. And anyone who gets diagnosed, we are going to give them an early treatment care package in the mail so they have something, whether it's steroids or anti-inflammatories or blood thinners, so that they can feel some confidence that in that viral replication stage in the first 7 days, that they can minimize their chance of being hospitalized. And then we're going to be talking about creating a health spending account, so you can have some of your own money to pay on things that are going to keep you well, mental health treatment on an annual basis, a nutritionist, a dietitian, somebody who can help get your diabetes under control or your obesity under control, because those are the conditions that are most likely to lead to an adverse outcome with COVID or anything else. And so if you could have a program like that, and in addition, there's one more thing I'd add. We've got companies that are putting in these UVC air filters that have a 99% success rate in killing bacteria and microbes. They've tested, we have a company in town in Calgary that has taken their equipment to a bio lab in Ireland and tested it against the COVID virus. COVID is a very flimsy virus, it gets killed very easily. So why not put these UVC lights in all of our long-term care facilities and in our schools, so that parents can feel some confidence when they put their kids in classes? This company has managed to sell to 10 different school boards in Ontario, and they haven't sold to any school boards here. And they're a company here that's been operating since 2004.
If you're not careful, you're going to have nothing to campaign on
Okay.
when you announce you're going back into
Hold on,
politics.
stop. One more thing I'd say.
One more thing.
One more thing. But you see what I mean? Like, if you say, we're going to take off all the restrictions and we're still going to do nothing. Of course, when you see surges again, people are going to feel uptight and anxious and think that the only solution is lockdowns. You have to do something different, and you have to do something like what Ron DeSantis has done in Florida, so that people know that they are going to be taken care of if they get sick. Right now, they don't have that confidence, which is why they are so quick to say, throw on the mask, do a vaccine passport, shut down the restaurants and gyms, and we can't keep doing this.
Ian, this is the last question, then we don't, yeah, go ahead.
In regards to vaccine entry, since manufacturers are not reliable, who picks up that burden? What if we find out there's malfeasance? Who picks up the burden?
Vaccine injury.
And
Well,
who picks
the
up
doctors are in the
picks up
room. Like, I'm
liability?
not saying anything incorrect by saying that we know there's vaccine injury, correct? I'm just going to
Yeah.
go to the
Yeah,
doctors and
yeah.
I see doctors nodding their heads. So I'm not saying anything that is unknown. And we also know who's most at risk. It looks like certain types of vaccines for young boys cause myocarditis and pericarditis, and it looks like certain vaccines for young women cause blood clotting. My own doctor put me on a treatment protocol after I got the Johnson & Johnson, because he was worried that I would have blood clots. So I was on a couple of things for a month. And so he said, if you make it through the month, you'll probably be okay. And he didn't laugh. So I don't know, I may have to check back with him. But I am also going to go get the D-dimer test, because I want to see if I've had blood clotting. And he gave me another test as well that I can check to see if my heart is okay before I start back into my exercise program. So and I'll pay for those myself, I guess. I mean, those are things that I think we just need to be aware of, that we have to take responsibility for our own healthcare. We can't trust that the only injury that we might have is, a sore arm, or you might feel a little fatigued, which is, when they're trying to do their full consent, they don't actually tell you the full range. When I was down in the States, I must tell you, to their credit, I got a 5-page document telling me all of the potential vaccine effects that I could have, including a way to report any injury to the VAERS database. So the information in the US, I think, is much better than here. But Ian, to answer your question, the publicly funded healthcare system, because that's what's going to happen. That's all we have right now, is that if there is ongoing vaccine injury, it'll manifest in terms of, I guess, heart problems and blood clotting and aneurysms and nerve damage. And so that is all just going to be funded through the publicly funded healthcare system. And I hope it is not widespread. The vaccine injuries are much greater than what we've seen in previous years. But I don't know what it means in the long term. This is part of the reason why we normally take 3 years to approve these kinds of vaccines so that we can see the long-term impact. As I understand it, though, this final approval of the Comirnaty, is that how I'm saying it? The new Pfizer, as I understand it, it doesn't have the same liability protection as the emergency use authorization. But it's also my understanding that it's not in production yet, that we're still using the doses that are under the emergency use authorization. So until we start switching over to the new regime with the new formulations under the new protocols, my understanding is that the pharmaceutical companies are still protected. And I see one of the docs in front of you is nodding his head. So I think my understanding is correct. So it's all of us
Good,
as
yeah.
taxpayers.
Absolutely. No, but we got to.
Yeah. And Paul says, let's give Paul the last reason. The government's already bankrupt.
Yeah,
Thanks.
well, yeah.